to come to the Anna movement, because they've done a very good thing by bringing attention to corruption. But I think we are at that tipping point where if you don't turn that into a productive environment rather than just a witch-hunting carnival, we will lose this moment in history, because there is one to have a public catharsis with no introspection, and quite something else to, to chip away at the structures of democracy that will bring us to a safer place, and I think we're at that moment where none of us are interested in the chipping of it. So to come back to that, in the last 2 years, even having defined that there is a new kind of white-collar crime, do you think that it's just separate from legitimate profit-making altogether? How is it? And then what do you think are the ways in which we should be combating this? Was the idea of the Lokpal that Anna Hazare and Aravind Kejriwal, who is someone that you have supported, was that the correct way of going about it? Can we have one superstructure, magic wand that is going to sort this out?
Shoma, what Rajiv described is what we would call collusive corruption. As opposed to grassroots petty corruption to which we're all victims. Extortionary corruption, where for something that's your entitlement, a birth certificate, a land record, registration of a property, a sale deed, or even a tax assessment, you have to pay a bribe. But this is collusive corruption where the bribe giver and the bribe taker both collude. They benefit at the cost of society. That's why it appears to be victimless, because the victim is the amorphous whole, and that's a problem. Undoubtedly, punishment is important, but that's the last thing. I'm all for Lokpal, Lokayukta, and 100 other institutions, but that's the last thing. First is, as far as practicable competition, Rajiv and I were co-petitioners. We went to Supreme Court asking the court to cancel the 2G spectrum. For the first time in India's history, 122 licenses were cancelled, and the court gave a direction that in future, all natural resources should be allocated by competitive bidding. Ideally, that is the best thing. But sometimes competitive bidding may not be possible. After all, government may have legitimate reasons why there must be allocation of a resource to entrepreneurs on certain rational criteria. In which case, let there be something called windfall profit tax. Now, if somebody got an abnormal profit, not because of innovation or investment or skill or management, but because of monopoly control over the resources of the country, it happens sometimes, even in a legitimate transaction. Supposing suddenly the prices of petrol and oil shoot up globally, and you actually are in the exploration business. You may get abnormal profits, not because you are a sinner, but because you're lucky. Now, that luck at the cost of the country is not very right. Therefore, you must get a reasonable profit. The rest of it must flow back to the country in the form of windfall profit tax. The third way is to ensure that there is transparency in every one of these transactions. So there are answers. Take telephones, for instance. 15, 20 years ago, even members of this audience, if they wanted a telephone, it was hellish. I remember when I quit IAS to found a movement for democratic reform in India, I telephoned to a member of parliament because I leased out his son's property. His son was earlier a tenant there. The telephones were still retained. His business failed. So I had to ring up a member of parliament to say, look, you have an MP's quota to get a telephone. I don't know how many people remember that there was an MP's quota for telephones.
Correct.
And will you therefore please retain this telephone here, and I will pay you whatever the costs, and you can get an MP's quota. He could not oblige me. That's a different matter. But the point is, after 16 years in the administrative service, after a considerable amount of clout in my home state and some public recognition, I had to beg somebody for a telephone connection. Today, there's not one in India out of 1 billion telephone connections who had to bribe or beg. So where there is competition and technology, suddenly corruption has come down. If corruption is continuing in some sectors, it's because reform has not taken place. There is a perception in some of the media in the country that reform is the cause of corruption. There's nothing farther from truth. Reform, wherever it really happened, true reform, actually it brought down corruption. Because monopolies and state control are continued, corruption continues. The challenge is how to break that. After having said all these things, and of course decentralization of power, as far as practicable, try and decentralize, localize, delegate so that people know the link between the taxes and services, what's happening to my money, and it becomes much more vocal. Otherwise, victimless corruption continues. People think it's not my problem. Once I see it's my problem, I am the loser, this money could have been put to use for my benefit and it's going to somebody's pockets, then I am going to be a partner in this fight. There are some innovative tools like, for instance, in the United States, you have what is called False Claims Act. Any citizen can fight a litigation and say, look, so-and-so, Jayaprakash, he is a supplier to the government because of the price gouging, because he cheated the system. He is charging more than what the market would have charged. And therefore, there's a loss sustained. If that person proves it in a court of law, the court in a summary trial can impose a penalty up to 5 times the loss sustained. And the fellow who went to court, he will get 10–15% of the share. So you actually incentivize citizens' fight. And finally, certainly, you have to punish. Now, let me give you one illustration. Rod Blagojevich, I don't know how many people remember, this chap was governor of Illinois State when Barack Obama was elected president. He was earlier senator from Illinois, if you remember Obama. Now, all this fellow did was something very simple and silly by Indian standards. Rajiv and others would be laughing at it. He had the power to appoint the senator in the interim before the next election. What he did was simply bargain for $100,000, not even a bribe, but funding to his election campaign by check. $100,000, even by Indian standards, is peanuts to appoint a member of parliament. Now, a senator in the United States is really a mighty legislative figure. That's what he bargained for. He didn't even get the money. What happened? He lost the office, the governor of one of the biggest states of the United States. He was jailed recently for 14 years. His family is on the streets, and financially is bankrupt. Now, that kind of swift and sure justice, where you not only lose your liberty, but also your property. And in India, believe me, property works.
Matters more than liberty.
It matters, because I don't think people really care if they're in jail for a few years. Because my giving property to my children is the most important. That's necessary. But I cannot overemphasize the fact that what's important really is to create conditions where that's no longer necessary to actually be corrupt or possible to be corrupt. Because you cannot punish 1 billion people. You have to have that as a last resort. Unfortunately, in this whole debate in the country, there's a perception that there is a panacea. There's one great monolithic institution that will transform India tomorrow. But the problem is, who will police the police?
No, absolutely. That's why so many have resisted the formulation of the Lokpal bill. Just one more before I come back to Rajiv, Jayaprakash, that this issue of auction itself is a complicated one. The baseline entry may become more fair and transparent. But we've also had cases in India where, and they're still going on, where even after something has been auctioned, the terms of that contract can change, what constitutes profit, what will go to the government, what will not. How have other countries come to situations where all of this gets solidified in better ways? You can still game the system even after something has been auctioned.
Shoma, if somebody is determined to make money in public office, no matter how many barriers you create, how many laws you make, there are always ways of making it happen. Ultimately, there are two things. One is, you must enhance the credibility of the system. You must ensure swift and sure punishment in case of wrongdoing. You cannot really anticipate all contingencies in the world. And the second is, you must create a political system that lends itself less to corruption. Let me be brutally honest. Rajiv is in the upper house of the parliament. I've been elected to the lower house. I know what electoral politics are. I entered it not because I love to be elected, because I know it's terrible, it's disgraceful, but the kind of people that ought to be in public office are now shunning it. The political system is completely hostile to the Tilaks and the Gokhales and the Gandhis and the Ambedkars and the Nehrus and the Maulana Azads and the Sarojini Naidus. And it's only the sons and daughters of politicians because of pedigree. Some 70 to 80% of all younger members of parliament are essentially sons and daughters of politicians, or very big money, unprecedentedly large amounts of money, even by global standards, or criminals, all kinds of things. This is not the right way. Barack Obama and Cameron, both 7-8 years ago, were unknown virtually in their countries. But they could easily rise to the top of their political parties and the nation because they were competent and the system allowed a new entrant to become a leader with new ideas. In India, it's impossible. Unless you transform the political system, and unless you create conditions hospitable to the best and the brightest, unless you create conditions where honesty and survival in public office are compatible. And believe me, in India today, even if you're individually honest, increasingly honesty and survival in public office are incompatible. Therefore, the politician is actually a victim of a vicious cycle. I know I'm saying something unpopular, something that's counterintuitive. We all love to hate our politicians, and who doesn't, anywhere in a democratic world. But there's something much deeper. Let me just say quickly, there are three big problems. The best are not entering. If they enter, they're rejected, ejected, humiliated in no time. They only have to go to the upper house if the parties favor them. Two, money power is playing havoc. Take my home state of Andhra Pradesh. To get elected to the state legislature, 5 crores is the norm for an average candidate. I am the only exception in the whole state of Andhra Pradesh where a fellow spent only 4 lakh rupees to get elected. It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable in today's India. Much of it. Even in Kashmir, I'm told yesterday, one of your colleagues from Kashmir, Omar, was telling me, even in Kashmir, they spent 500 rupees per vote per party and 300 rupees another party. I'm shocked that even in Kashmir it is happening. So money power of this kind, if you think after that there is no corruption, it's absurd. The third thing is the great national parties of this country. I'm not an admirer of them, Congress or BJP, but we need national parties to retain the idea of India. This very complex, this diverse, this wonderful nation of ours cannot be sustained by excessive parochialism and narrow-minded thinking. And the national parties are losing out. UP, Bihar, you take Bengal, you take Tamil Nadu, you take increasingly Andhra Pradesh, and even Maharashtra. The national parties are getting elbowed out. In 290 out of the 542 parliamentary constituencies, the national parties are practically marginal. It's a very unwholesome situation. We must switch over to a better system like proportional representation, where the marginal vote is not all important. Ethical politics is sustainable. A decent person can actually get in and be elected. The bar is not very high, but we must have some safeguards to ensure that narrow-minded politics do not really gain dominance. There are methods. It's a technical issue. But the point is, there are institutional answers. Don't simply blame these fellows. The easiest thing is all politicians are rascals, all bureaucrats are corrupt, all judges are useless. Then who is useful in this country, pray tell me? It's absurd to think that all of us are wonderful and all of them are bad.
I couldn't agree with you more, and one has been in this very uncomfortable position of suddenly standing up for the establishment, which is really...
No, we are the establishment. All of us are the establishment, like it or not.
And for a country like India, the most important thing is politics, so to outlaw politics is suicidal.
Absolutely.
Again, before I come to Rajiv, you've already created, and so have others, a blueprint for electoral reform. And I asked Manish that yesterday, and he didn't quite answer it. Why is there such resistance from the political system to electoral reform?
I don't think there's resistance. I think there's inertia, really. Party management is so incredibly complex, so innervating, so exhausting in the country. It is made worse because these fellows want to hold on to that control. Instead of making it a democratic party where everybody is bearing the burden, it's all Sonia Gandhi's burden, L.K. Advani's burden, Chandrababu Naidu's burden, or Shiv Sena boss's burden, or somebody else's burden. And once you have that, you have this whole palace intrigues, this whole insecurity, this fear of losing control, and you think that you're actually in control, you become a slave. And in order to ensure that your son or daughter is the successor, you are really undermining yourself, your authority, and of course the nation's future. If you make the parties democratic, it's easier. And secondly, oftentimes, the parties don't even have the time and energy to understand what is in their best interest. All they look at is what's in front of their noses today, this election, somehow getting a few more seats, somehow buying a few more fellows in parliament or assembly, somehow being in office today. What for? We forget. No, Einstein said, 20th century is characterized by perfection of means and confusion of ends. And I think our politicians are a classic illustration.
Okay.